Tea Smuggling, written by This Beautiful Light, read by Arashi. Why was he so nervous? He was hardly committing a crime. He was simply making a purchase. That's what markets were for, weren't they? The merchant raised an eyebrow at him. Hubert could hardly blame the man. No doubt he had noticed the unseasonable sweat at Hubert's brow, or the fact that he punctuated each sentence with a feeble, unconvincing cough, or his inability to look at the merchant in the eye. When Hubert requested a bag, the merchant looked flustered and muttered something about not usually having to cater for such large items. He managed to find a Hessian sack, one that had clearly been sitting on the marketplace flagstones for most of the day. A cloud of dust erupted around them as the merchant shook it open, and it smelled quite strongly of onions. Hubert tucked the sack under his arm and scurried to his carriage, head held low and avoiding eye contact with any passers-by. The guards mercifully said nothing, dutifully casting their gaze away from him, even when the bag slipped and the box tumbled onto the monastery pathway. Thank the false gods that Hubert's mere presence struck fear into their hearts. Well, in all but one, nothing fazed the chatty gatekeeper. "Greetings, Lord Vestra," he beamed with a stiff salute. "Nothing to report." Hubert couldn't see much of his face, but the sickeningly jovial man tilted his head with interest. "What's that you got there, sir?" Hubert scowled, clumsily maneuvering the box behind his back. "I don't see how that would be any of your—" "I didn't know you drank tea, sir," the gatekeeper gasped excitedly, leaning around him for a closer look at the box in Hubert's hands. The Hessian had slid back, revealing the painted box hidden beneath. "I don't. Hubert kept walking, face frozen in a look of irritation and disgust. The gatekeeper said nothing further, but watched him as he made his hasty retreat. This was ridiculous. He wouldn't need to be so Calistine if everyone would cease snooping into his affairs. Affairs? You could hardly call it that. Yes, Hubert von Vestra had made a purchase at the market. Stop the presses. "Hubert!" He realized that Caspar had been calling out to him as he reached the courtyard. Closing his eyes, Hubert cursed into the void. "I was going to ask if you—" Caspar began, before narrowing his eyes and looking Hubert up and down. "What are you trying to hide?" he asked, a grin slowly forming. "Caspar, I don't have time for your games," Hubert bristled. "Since you deemed it appropriate to holler at me from across the gardens, I would thank you to get on with whatever asinine question you have for me, and allow me to proceed with my day." "Ho, ho!" Caspar loudly laughed, eyebrows high on his face and looking around him for someone to share his amusement with. "Look at you! What's got you in a tangle so early in the day, Hubert? Could it be something to do with that thing behind your back that you're so desperate to hide from me for some totally unsuspicious reason?" Hubert could feel heat in his cheeks and ground his teeth together. "Spit it out." Caspar folded his arms across his chest and let out a guffaw. "Never mind," he chirped with a shrug, and marched off in the direction of the training grounds. Hubert let out a breath and started to make his way back to his chamber. If he avoided the main hall, he was less likely to encounter people. The monastery graveyard was typically an isolated area. Or so he had hoped. How foolish to believe he would have such luck. "Hello, Ferdinand," he sighed as ire stepped into his path with a wave. Hubert took a moment to admire the way the sun made his hair shine that much brighter. He shifted the box under his arm, wrapping a hand over the painted label. Then he smelled something familiar and delicious in the air. Wait, that aroma. "Your nose is as sharp as ever, Hubert." Ferdinand's smile. It was pure sunshine. 1,000 flowers would bloom at the sight of it. "Yes, it is a bag of fresh coffee beans." Coffee beans? Hubert couldn't help the frown that tightened at his brow. He asked himself why Ferdinand would have a bag of coffee beans, and his mind supplied an answer. Because you don't know him like you think. You are a clueless fool, and this beautiful man is more than likely courting someone far, far better than you, someone deserving. "Why did you buy the coffee? You said you don't care for it." "My stance has not changed," Ferdinand confirmed earnestly, one hand resting at his slender hips, drab, bitter, with a muddy texture. "If I have even a sip, my hands start to tremble." Hubert bristled. He knew it was irrational, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Ferdinand was critiquing him. Rather harsh. "What are you doing with it, then?" "Well, you see." Ferdinand's gaze drifted to the box under Hubert's arm. "Wait a moment. What is that? Is that an imported tea from the East?" Hubert swallowed. There was no sense in denying it when Ferdinand was staring right at it. "It is indeed. Keen eyes. Flaunting my favorite drink right in front of me." Ferdinand looked troubled somehow, and Hubert couldn't quite place the reason for it. "And you do not even drink tea. Fiendish. It is for Edelgard, I assume." Was he still jealous of Edelgard? After all these years, and over something so juvenile? Hubert hesitated. He had bought the tea for Ferdinand, and had every intention of giving it to him, but perhaps he should stop and examine his actions. Was he behaving like a love-struck simpleton? Would Ferdinand be embarrassed to receive a gift? Would he guess at Hubert's romantic intentions? Ferdinand was probably no stranger to unreciprocated affection. His rejections were probably gentle and soft. The man was a marvel, and Hubert had to do something about the fact that he couldn't think straight in his presence. "Before I answer that, I would like to know what you were doing with the coffee." "Well, Ferdinand blushed and turned his gaze to the floor. Hubert was powerless against that surge of jealousy that bubbled up to the surface. "Is it a gift?" he asked in a teasing tone, one that he likely hadn't used since his academy days. He was already ashamed of his infantile behavior, but entirely at the mercy of his desire for answers. "Perhaps for someone you fancy?" Ferdinand blushed again and met his gaze. Joy sparkled in his eyes. So, Hubert was right. Ferdinand was courting someone. "A gift, yes," Ferdinand replied finally, his voice a little less strained, but cheeks returning to their natural color. "For you." Who is the unlucky?" The words took a moment to sink in, but when they did, many of his facilities ground to a halt. "Did you say for me? This coffee is a gift for me. Have I heard you correctly?" Hubert could hardly hear Ferdinand's reply over the blood rushing in his ears. "Yes, that is what I said." Ferdinand nodded, and his cheeks bloomed pink for a third time. "A noble does not go back on his word." He held the bag of coffee beans out to Hubert and smiled softly. "Just take it." Hubert stared at Ferdinand for a moment and lamented the fact that he had never quite perfected a truth potion. Not that it would help. Ferdinand didn't lie. Ferdinand spoke around the truth. What did all of this mean? He knew why he had brought Ferdinand a gift. In part, it was a first step, a mark of intention, the testing of waters. But Ferdinand, perhaps this was nothing to him. "I should decline," Hubert announced finally, not entirely certain what he was going to say next, but far flung from his comfort zone. His stomach churned as he desperately tried to weigh his options and calculate every possible outcome. "Why?" Ferdinand looked and sounded crushed. Hubert dared not hope. For one sickening moment, they both stared at the floor in silence. "The thought of receiving a gift from you, unbidden and unreciprocated, fills me with revulsion." The words tumbled out of Hubert's mouth before he could adjust the unintentionally disgusted tone his voice had taken. "Therefore," he hurriedly pulled the wooden box out from under his arm and shoved it in Ferdinand's direction. "Accept this tea as a gift from me." Ferdinand looked surprised and relieved. "For me?" he breathed. "Are you certain? I would hate to deprive the intended recipient of such a fine tea." Hubert smiled, and worth bloomed over his chest. "That would be difficult to do, since I bought it with you in mind." "Oh, in that case, thank—" "What?" Ferdinand looked stunned, and all at once Hubert felt seen. His intentions lay bare, and Ferdinand didn't seem upset. "You were planning to give this to me all along?" "That is what I said." Hubert's face was on fire. He supposed that was what happened when eyes the color of embers were fixed on you, burning with curiosity. Even as they walked to the gardens to take tea together, Hubert wasn't certain what had just occurred, nor what it meant. All he knew was that his heart was racing, that he dearly wished to evade the attention of the monastery residents, and that it had likely taken mere minutes for everyone to learn about Ferdinand's newly acquired box of tea.